Hello and welcome to this LIBS Bitesize session with me, Tobias Bruenner. I'm a senior lecturer in economics here at the Lincoln International Business School. And my topics for this LIBS Bitesize session is women on boards and the stability of banks. Women on boards and the stability of banks is a fascinating topic because it connects two important issues that are very important in their own right. The first issue is the stability of banks and the banking industry as a whole. A well-functioning banking sector is very important for any modern economy, and because banks are highly interconnected, the failure of one bank or the insolvency of one bank can have serious repercussions on the whole banking industry. So if that happens, for example, businesses might not get the loans they were promised to receive, households might not get their deposits back and their savings. And if it's a big bank, an important bank for the economy, the government needs to bail out the bank, and that costs taxpayers money as well. So clearly, such a situation is bad for the entire economy. So situations of big financial crises like these don't happen too often. So we had a one in 2007, 2008. But the reason why they don't happen that often is because central banks like the Bank of England continuously try to improve regulation, and they think about how they can tailor regulation to make banks safer and to minimize the risks of insolvencies. So that's an important issue. The second important issue is gender equality. We believe in equal opportunities for everyone, and that includes that your chances of becoming a board member at a bank or be a director on a company's board should not depend on your gender. And having female directors or female members of boards is very important as well, not only for their own representation, but also for because they serve as role models for women at the early stages of their careers. The following slides here show the development of the female representation on company boards, and especially UK banks, for the last 10 years, so starting 2010 up to 2019. And if we look at the blue line first, the number of women you can see in 2010, that's just 0.7. So the average number of women on a UK bank's board was 0.7. So if you picked in 2010, 10 random banks, more or less, roughly speaking, 7 of these 10 banks would have 1 female board member, and 3 of these 10 banks would have no female board member. So this is, of course, a very disappointing finding, a very low female representation. We can see that this blue line is increasing steadily over these years, and in 2019 the average is 1.6, or a bit above 1.6. So the situation has improved, but not to a satisfactory extent. The average board size is, roughly speaking, 10, so just 1.6 female members is very low. This can also be seen when we look at the gender ratio, so the proportion of female board members, that's the orange line. In 2010, the gender ratio on average was just 10%. So 10% of the board members were female. Again, this steadily increased over the 10 years, but in 2019, it's still only 20%. So this is far away from equal representation of 50%. It's also far away from a voluntary target that a government-backed report set in 2016. So in 2016, the target was to reach a 33% representation by 2020. This will not be met right? It took us 10 years to go from 10% representation to 20%. So to get to 33%, will not be possible in 1 year. In fact, if we continue at that speed, it will take another 13 years until this target has been reached. So representation is very low. There are slight improvements, but overall quite disappointing. Now, how are these two issues related? The stability of banks on the one hand side and the number of women on banks' boards on the other side. Well, there's this notion that having more female directors makes banks safer and less likely to go bankrupt or insolvent. Why might this be the case? So one explanation is that women have a lower risk tolerance on average. And if you have more women on the boards, then the board's decision will be a bit less, or a bit more risk averse, or a bit more cautious, and the banks become more stable. This view has been challenged, however, because of a selection effect. So it might be true that on average, women are less risk tolerant than men, but those women who choose to work in the banking industry and do well and at some point reach or become a board member of a bank, they are likely to be not that much less risk tolerant than their male colleagues. They might have a similar risk tolerance than the male board members. A second explanation is that female directors monitor the bank's activities much more closely because they don't belong to this old boys club and they challenge the groupthink in these boards, ask difficult questions, and investigate a little more thoroughly. Another possible explanation is that, and that's somehow related, if you have more female members on the board, the diversity of the board increases, and you have a broader spectrum of different views represented in that board. And that, again, opens up the discussion. People challenge each other's views. There's more critical thinking happening, and that leads to better decisions. And better decisions should make a bank safer. The final reason why more female representation might make banks safer is the observation that banks often take excessive risks when competition in the banking sector intensifies. So in such a situation, banks often adopt a high-risk, high-reward strategy to come out on top of this competition and be the most profitable or bank in that period. Now, there's evidence that women tend to shy away from competitive situations like these. They shy away in situations where men embrace these situations and are even too competitive. They are competitive and even overly competitive. And that's why men are more likely to engage in these high-risk, high-reward strategies than women, and more women on the board would make this less likely. For all these explanations to work, or for all these mechanisms to have an effect, it is important that the bank seriously commits to this female representation. So if a bank just hires one or two female board members as a symbolic gesture to please an investor or to please shareholders or to please the regulator, that wouldn't work. That doesn't make a bank safer. There need to be a critical number of women that they can successfully challenge groupthink, that they can influence the decisions, and, for example, when it comes how to respond to a competitive situation, So we need a critical mass of women on the boards for those mechanisms to work. And evidence shows that this is 3. The critical number of women you need on a board is 3. If you have 3 or more women, then there's a positive effect. And here's data that highlights this. So this is, again, the same banks and the same period that we saw in the previous graph. So this includes all the UK banks and financial intermediaries that perform banking-like services from the period from 2010 to 2019. And each bar here represents the average stability of banks given the number of female board members. So the first bar represents the average stability of all the banks with not a single female board member. Then the second bar is summarizing all the banks with exactly 1 female board members, and so on. The height of each bar is the average stability, and stability here is measured by the logarithm of the Z-score. What that exactly is not important here, but the interpretation is, or what this Z-score measures, is the distance to insolvency. So the higher the blue bar is, the further away the bank is from being insolvent. And that means that the higher the blue bar, the more stable the bank is, the safer the bank is. Now, if we compare these bars, we see that going from having no female board member on the board to 1 female board member actually makes a bank less stable. And going from 1 female board member to 2 female board members again makes the bank less stable. However, if we increase the number of women on the board from 2 to 3, then we see a big positive effect and the banks become more stable. They are more stable than the banks with no female board member. And if we have more than 3 board members, the final bar here, then we observe the highest stability of banks in this graph. So this confirms this critical mass theory that yes, women do have a positive effect on decision making and of the board, and as a result, the stability of the bank. But this positive effect only comes through when we have at least 3 female board members. Interestingly, the typical UK bank currently has 2 female board members. So we are currently in the worst place of this chart, right? In terms of stability, we are in the worst place. So boards with 2 female members are the least stable banks. But that doesn't mean that we should reduce the number of women, of course, to 1 or 0 again to make it up. What needs to be done is this final push to get the number of women from 2 to 3, and then all these positive effects outlined on the previous slide will hopefully materialize and banks will become more stable. Right, so and that's a great result because we've connected these two important issues, and we found that they are not. There's no trade-off. There's no conflict between them. If we manage to have more women on boards, it is not only good for equal representation of the 2 genders. It also, at the same time, makes banks safer, and therefore not putting more pressure on banks to increase the number of women on their boards is a missed opportunity for 2 reasons: in terms of equal representation, and also for making banks safer, and also as a result of this, the whole banking sector more stable. All right, thank you for watching, and I hope you will tune in next week again. Goodbye. Thank you.